Baba, Dook, Dook, Dook. All right.
Welcome, everyone, to our first annual Halloween terrifying, electrifying extravaganza. Extravaganza is a weird word. It usually pertains to like some high production, crazy value thing. And we're just two guys in front of a microphone.
Yeah.
But thank you guys for joining us. We're on episode 15.
Yeah.
We have a great movie, one of my favorite horror movies to talk about. We are 2 episodes into the horror Halloween season, where we see people wanting to watch more horror type movies and scary movies. So for the months of September and October, that's what we're going to be recommending. We may have a few bonus episodes out in between that. But thank you guys for joining us. My name is Nabahi.
Hello, I'm Wallied from Sergita Productions.
And we're on episode 15, and we're going to get into it here in a little bit with the main movie. So if you're joining us on Spotify or YouTube, we have timestamps. If you would like to jump straight to the review, please do so. But we have some movie news that I would like to cover. Unfortunately, we may have to touch on something a little somber to start with. But I just wanted to recognize something that I heard in movie news, and it affected me. I believe it was on Tuesday or Wednesday, the unfortunate passing of James Earl Jones at the age of 93 happened. It's a big deal for me. James Earl Jones, obviously, he has been in some great movies. He has done some fantastic voice work. But growing up as a kid, I had such a deep connection with the Star Wars movies. I was showed them at a very young age, and I can recollect so much from watching them. And obviously, he was the voice of Darth Vader, something that is just so synonymous with me and my life and my childhood. So hearing his passing really was unfortunate. After I heard it, when I got home, I just put on A New Hope and was like, damn, this is sad. But he did live a very long life, and he achieved so much in his life. He has done so much for the state of movies, and if I'm being completely honest, I think Darth Vader is the most iconic villain in film history, at least for me. So much about that character just changed the way stories and movies were made. So yeah, it's very unfortunate to hear about his passing, but he did live a long life, and he achieved so much. Obviously, outside of Darth Vader, he was the voice of Mufasa, which The Lion King is such a big deal to people, and to show the testament of his voice acting when it was remade. He was the only actor they brought back to play Mufasa. Like that. Yeah, that is such a big deal. If you're rebooting a story and retelling it, to say that, you know what, there is no other one. There's no one else who can fill this role. Like, granted, that's no testament to what I think of the movie, the remake. But the fact that they brought him back is such a big deal. He really had such an impact in his life and everything. I guess Wallied, I mean, obviously you've heard his name, of his passing. I guess what would be your connection that you maybe had with his acting and performances?
Yeah, so my connection with him was actually when I was a kid. Seeing his performance as Mufasa was always just one that stood out to me, the 1994 version. And just, even though he wasn't in the movie that much, like his just presence and his voice fit the character so perfectly. And it was just almost like you're hearing, like, maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but it was like almost like you're hearing the voice of God almost watching The Lion King. And The Lion King is one of my all-time favorite films like ever made. So to hear his voice performance in that film is just like, he does such an incredible job. It's easily like one of my favorite voice performances in any film. And then his performance actually in The Sandlot too, because I grew up watching The Sandlot a lot when I was a kid, especially during like summer programs. They would always play The Sandlot, and I always remembered his performance where they kind of made him seem like this really intimidating guy. And it's like, once you got to know that character, it was like, oh, he's not too bad. He's just a baseball collector and he's a baseball fan like
Yeah.
them. I would say for me, like those were the two performances that I really connected with a lot with him, especially growing up as a kid, especially because those two films had such a massive impact on me as a kid. And then obviously his performance as Darth Vader is like quite possibly one of the greatest film villains in cinema, like period. Like I really can't imagine anybody else voicing that character other than him.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on something that I think shows a true testament to what he did. For those people who don't know, for the pretty much the first 8 years of his childhood, he actually was totally mute and didn't talk at all.
Wow.
And he obviously would address anytime he would interview that he had a stutter, you know, and to go to struggle with talking that much early on in life, to not only learn how to talk and converse, but then to be known for that is such a big testament for people to know that, you know, you can be such a great success at things that maybe is something that is challenging when you first start, you know, like the fact that he was able to get a professional job with acting and then go on to voice acting is so big, you know. Many people I've known and seen, sometimes they struggle with conversations, they struggle with, you know, conversing, and it's hard for them, you know. But to see someone on such a grand level go on and have enormous success for it is amazing. And yeah, hearing about that was just really, really unfortunate. I guess stuff I would like to touch on, obviously growing up, I knew him with Star Wars, but it was so funny, like growing up and you would play like Star Wars video games. Anytime you'd hear Darth Vader, I could tell as a kid, oh, this isn't James Earl Jones. This sounds like some other guy.
Yeah.
And then you would see the credits at the end of the game and you're like, that isn't him. And it was so funny because it's just like, it's a voice. Like, what does it matter?
Yeah.
And it kind of touches on him in general. Like when he first got the role, he went and recorded in a studio for 2 hours and he got paid, I think it was like $8,000. He didn't take a credit for the first 2 Star Wars movies because he saw his voice almost as like a special effect. He didn't really think that it was worth crediting. He would always give full credit to the actor in the costume, David Prowse. And that's such a humble way to, you know, realize that, like, yeah, like I don't want to take credit from any of the performance in the movies, you know. Sometimes people fight for credits and their recognition and stuff. And to see someone so selfless and not really think of himself in that way is a big testament to who he is. And you never heard any controversy with him. You never heard anything that, you know, malicious or anything. And yeah, he really is just, for me, such a monumental part of film history. I encourage people, please, if you have the time, watch the behind the scenes of the making of Star Wars. It's so funny. While they were filming on set, you had David Prowse, I believe he was British, huge guy, huge, like I think he was close to like 7 feet, big guy that they had in this costume. And while they were making the movie, there's clips of it. You hear his original voice.
Oh, I've seen those. Yeah.
And it clearly does not fit what you're seeing on screen.
He almost sounds like a brat.
Yeah. I encourage people to go find those clips, and you really will see how much James Earl Jones added to that character.
It just elevated it too.
Yeah. And I really, I want to give testament to, obviously, that character to me is just the pinnacle of what I love about film. It's an amalgamation of so many different things. You had David Prowse in the costume. You had Ralph McQuarrie's original drawings that really gave life to this world. You have James Earl Jones' voice. You have Ben Burtt's sound design giving the breathing to Darth Vader and the iconicness of that. And it really is just this amalgamation of all these people working together to pull this character off really just gives you a testament to that film, and James Earl Jones just adding that final part. You had all these people working to get Darth Vader to make him believable and to make him convincing, and James Earl Jones coming in and voicing him just added that final part that was necessary. You had everything up until then, and I just love Star Wars so much, and it's really going to be sad now knowing that James Earl Jones has passed on, but he lived quite a life, and I just wanted to recognize that here on the podcast today. For me, it was hard seeing that.
Yeah.
It was hard to hear that news, but thank you, James, for everything you did. You are just such a synonymous part of my childhood and everything that I'm gonna miss you. But thank you for everything you've done. Obviously, I'm such a big Star Wars fan, so it did hit a little hard, but he lived quite a life and he achieved a lot. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, James Earl Jones. Yeah, Mufasa's performance is genuinely easily one of my favorite voice performances ever. And it's a film I do want to talk about at some point because I think that original Lion King film is just so fantastic. Yeah. And especially his performance and just that whole character and everything. He really embodies it really, really well.
Yeah.
Easily one of my favorite voice actors in film, period.
Yeah.
And it's sad to hear that he's no longer with us, but R.I.P. to
one of
James
the
Earl
greats.
Jones.
One of the greats. But thank you guys for joining us. I do apologize about that. I couldn't have a film podcast and not discuss that.
Yeah.
To me, that was just a big deal. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned it. All right. 2014, The
10 years old.
Babadook, directed by Jennifer Kent and written by her. Yeah, this movie, I heard about it in the online review space of the time, and I immediately, my interests were piqued with it, and I didn't see it in theaters. There was a video reselling place where I live, and I went there to go and find this movie, and I found it on Blu-ray, and I bought it. I heard so many good things that I was like, I'm just going to buy it. Like, who knows? I might like it. I might hate it. I guess a little pretext before we talk about the movie. Horror was in a very strange place in the 2000s era. We saw it change in film in general. Celluloid was no longer a thing, and we had moved on to digital, where cameras are now a lot smaller, a lot more compact. So what you would see is a lot of handheld type stuff, a lot of very, low budget, in your face kind of direction,
Shaky cam.
And yes, that did end up changing horror as well. You saw in the 2000s a lot of graphic kind of out there violence, and obviously horror had been changed from the moment Psycho came out. But you would see these directors who grew up watching those movies and they would want to take it to a further place. Mm-hmm. A lot of people refer to this era of the 2000s as like the graphic horror, violence porn era, because you saw movies like Saw, super into kills, super into creative ways of showing violence and things like that. Mm-hmm. And with it all being digital, everything had this very gritty, low budget feel to it. However, coming out of 2010s, horror was in a very weird place. We had seen, I think horror is the reason for this, a revitalizing of old franchises. We saw in 2010, 12, 13 remakes of old franchises like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw. And I really feel like that kind of started this whole reboot, reimagining kind of culture. And none of these films were really sticking, Everything felt, what is this, Then in 2014, a movie came along that I feel like kind of changed where we were in terms of the horror genre in general. And that is this movie, The Babadook. And I feel like it really helped in the creation of the phrase elevated horror, or what people say in terms of these movies. Do I agree with that statement? To an extent. Now you found that these directors and storytellers wanted to tell something that wasn't just violence, wasn't just graphic. They wanted you to have a profound kind of impact. Okay, maybe these movies can touch you in a way that regular movies and dramas can, but in the context of like a horror movie. And when the Babadook came out, it garnered a lot of conversation in the film community. There was a lot of talk going on about this movie. And I feel like we are still in this era currently with horror. You see these elevated horror movies, you see these psychological, more than just what's in front of you type horror, you know? And yeah, I really love this movie. I'm so excited to talk about it today. Yeah, I guess a little, setup for the plot. You have a mom who has suffered a great loss of her husband, and she's trying to navigate the world in which she's living now, being a single mom, her only son. And has she really gotten over this loss? Has she really taken that next step to kind of, yes, acknowledge the past, but kind of move past it? And this film really delves into that. But it does it in, I think, a creative way. You have this story about loss and grief and everything, depression, but told in the context of a horror movie to me is very, very interesting. I said in the last episode, to me, this feels kind of like a Twilight Zone episode where an average person going through kind of like a crisis, and you use this otherworldly kind of presence to tell that story. To me, it's just so fascinating and so interesting. Obviously, throughout the movie, you get the behind the context story of her losing her husband, her raising her kid who has developmental issues, obviously losing a father. Pretty much when he was born, they were on the way to the hospital when it happened. It can be hard, And not only that, having the reoccurrence of basically the anniversary every time, it's this kid's birthday, you're reminded that this kid is kind of the byproduct of losing someone, How do you as a person process that? How do you get around that? And I know me describing this, it's like, okay, what is that? Like, how is this is a horror movie, Because everything I say, it really doesn't sound like it. Where the horror comes into play in this movie, you have a young child, again, has some developmental issues, yet he clues in his mom by wanting to read this story. Leading up to that, they show quite a bit what this mom is going through at work, at home, dealing with her son, who has a hard time connecting with other kids, other people, things like that. This kid wants to be read this bedtime story. He picks one off the shelf. It's called Mr. Babadook, and it's like a pop-up book, and it has this red cover, and it looks very ominous, and it's just like, what is this? And from that moment on, the horror is introduced. You're introduced to this otherworldly presence. The mom starts reading through the story, and you kind of realize that, okay, this book is kind of weird. And as the story goes on, it gets dark very, very fast. And you can tell that the mom is deeply affected by it. And she sees it as this bad thing, and it's evil, and she has to get rid of it. And yeah, it has some horror tropes of, obviously, like, you hear about this and you see it and you're just trying to get it out of here. You're like, what is this? But through that whole story, this monster, I think, is just so expertly introduced. I love it when stories have that unique artwork to it. It really helps you feel that sense of dread. And especially, again, this is one of my favorite things that I find scary, is just like the book alludes to this monster showing up at the house. And that's what the mom has a hard time with. And it really starts to feel like, okay, this is something's going on, Yeah. And showing that imagery and everything, these drawings and the way this pop-up book is, I just love it so much. I love that introduction of this monster, this horror that's happening. We'll get into more in the plot here in a little bit. I guess Wallied, through that first introduction, that first kind of part, while the monster is being introduced, in the beginning and everything, what was going through your head?
Wow, yeah, it's a lot to process. I was really surprised by this film for sure, because I almost kind of don't really see it as a horror film, but I more just see it as like a character study of this mother and her kid. And I wanted to get this out of the way because I know you mentioned that some people weren't big on the acting, but I really loved the acting in this film,
Yeah.
like especially from the child and especially from the mother. Like they give like these really incredible, almost kind of disturbingly realistic performances almost, you know? And I really love just like the use of like the colors and how there's a lot of like grays and blacks and a lot of whites used throughout, you know? It's almost like I see it as like as almost like the Babadook is almost just haunting them almost. Like I kind of see like the Babadook as like a personal inner demon that like the mom has been bottling up for years and years through this denial stage of grief that she's in almost.
Yeah. It's right away when you're watching this, everything is conveyed in such a great way. The intro I love, showing the car crash and everything
Yeah.
done in such a creative
It's like
great shots and transitions.
Euphoric sequence for sure.
And it really sells you on the fact that like you're watching a person who has not gotten past this. It affects them day and night, everything they do. They can't really escape it, you know? And it's done so brilliantly to tie that to the Babadook as like, you can't get away from this. This is something that's gonna be there, you know?
Yeah.
You have to address it. Again, this film works for me on multiple levels. And it's just a true testament to the story and how it's made. You could have this movie and show it to someone, and it has those great horror elements of, you know, fear, dread, scary monsters, everything like that. It works on that level, but then it works on that deeper level too of a mom processing her grief, taking that next step to move on and to fully try to be yourself again, you know?
Yeah.
And it has all these levels to it that just blend in such a great way. Her struggling to get her son to a place where he feels welcome with people he's around. They really feel like outcasts, and they do such a great job of showing it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not only, like Wallied said, they have this great dark color palette going on. Anytime you're in the house, you have blacks, grays, really just that dark colorness to it. And yet when she's out during the day, she's dressed up almost as like this. When she's at work, it's like she's wearing this old traditional outfit, almost like she's like a doll, you know?
Yeah.
And it really makes you feel that she's putting on this look for everyone. Like this is something that she does. And again, when you're when you're going through depression and grief and stuff like that, you do that. You put on these masks. You don't want people to know, and it starts to slip through, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're seeing a window into their lives. And I think one thing that surprised me so much too with this film is just the metaphors and just like the different symbolism throughout, like where they would portray neglect and emotional and physical abuse, which really surprised me, especially like there's a scene in the film where she just basically tells her kid to go play. And then you see the kid is like in like the treehouse with her cousin, and you see him starting to get like super violent, and understandably so. You know, she's like talking about his dad, and you see him like push her off like the treehouse, and it's like, dang, it's like the mom barely even notices or cares to go even look. You know, and there's even another scene earlier in the film where they're like at the playground, and there's a really awesome transition where like he jumps off. And it's like you see him crying, and you just kind of see her just acting almost oblivious to the situation. You see her just kind of like she's like, "Oh yeah, you're fine, you're good. You shouldn't have done that." And it really surprised me in that sense. And it was like, or even later on in the film when she gets possessed, like you see her like telling him off, like because she's gotten like barely any sleep for like the past like couple of days because she's just so haunted by this Babadook that's coming around. And it's like, again, she doesn't really know how to help her son because she doesn't really have many resources, and she you almost just see her life falling apart. Like you see her, especially with like her sister and like that whole relationship where she is like basically just burning bridges with everyone imaginable.
Yeah. I guess going into it, like leading up to the book's introduction, your first time viewing, what's going through your head, like watching this story unfold, seeing everything, and when the book is introduced, what were you thinking?
The book, for me, was just so surprising because I was like, you almost like, I see the book as like a really awesome foreshadowing thing where you see like how all like the pages in the book and you see how it like comes back to haunt them later, like especially with her strangling the dog. It's almost like it's like a vision of like the future almost, you know, as I kind of see it.
That imagery and everything that was portrayed, were you getting unnerved by it? Were you getting scared?
I would say, yeah, like the Babadook design, like that face and like just the dark colors and like even the fonts of like the book. It was like something you're not supposed to read almost, you know? That's kind of how I felt, definitely. Like looking at that book, I was probably not want to even open up the book just looking at the cover. But yeah, it was it definitely got like under my skin for sure, you know?
And I just want to draw a testament to it. It's such a great introduction to a antagonist monster type figure. You have that stark imagery, that contrast, and then you go to day-to-day life and you start to see these images, and it's done in such a great way. You have shots in the background where you see a shadow-like figure, and maybe your eye wasn't supposed to catch it, but you do, and you're like, whoa, what is that? Where she sees like coat and a hat hanging when she goes to the police to tell them like someone left this book at my house, and she sees in the background that image connects in her head of the Babadook, like pretty much like stalking her and watching her. Really builds up that sense of fear of like, maybe I can't tell people about this. And then the cop's reaction is pretty much just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, we can't do anything about it. You don't have evidence.
Yeah.
And then like even like the next door neighbor, you even see like the Babadook just creeping up. And it's like, again, just like that personal inner demon is almost just coming to haunt her because she's not confronting it as I kind of see it.
Yeah. And again, it plays up to that whole aspect of something that I would say is more a traditional kind of horror, introducing that element that is otherworldly. And the whole time you're watching it, you're kind of left to assume, like, is this real? Am I looking at an actual monster? Is this something that's stalking her, you know? And it really plays into that sense of fear of you questioning what's going on. And you're like her. Wait, what was that? When you see shadows in the corner, you're like, whoa, what is that? And it really starts to mess with your mind a little bit. But obviously when you get to the end, you know pretty much what's happening. But while it's building that up before the Babadook is really full presence in the house, I felt like it did such a good job of playing into that horror of the unknown. You see this book, you see the drawings in it, and that is scary. It's scary to see that imagery, and then you can't really let go of those images. And
it's like they're just burned into your memory.
Yeah. I've had an instance like that. I read as a kid that Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark book.
Oh, man.
I swear there's some imagery in that. Like, what? This is a kid's book. So many of that imagery gave me nightmares, and I would have such a hard time forgetting them. Anytime, like, I'd be about to go to bed, an image would creep into my head, and I would immediately start freaking out. So I really love that. I love that this movie had that approach of, you know, seeing these imageries and stuff, and it's scary, and it really affects your day-to-day life. Now, obviously, the book alludes to basically the Babadook's coming. I'm going to be there, and you're going to have a hard time getting rid of me. The book is so amazingly written. It really is kind of like a kid's book, a kid's pop-up book.
In the most messed up way possibly.
Done in such a really dark way. Absolutely amazing. And
what an incredible prop.
Yeah. And she's obviously tried to let the police know. She's tried pretty much what everyone would do at that point. But you start to realize you kind of sound crazy. Now, I want people, if you're watching this movie, we hear stories on the news of people losing their minds and killing their family and whatever. Try to think of that while you're watching this movie. You are watching the moments before you see those stories in the news. You're watching someone lose their mind. You're watching someone go to that dark place.
Yeah.
And you get to see it unfold in this family's life.
You're seeing like the root of it almost. And that's one thing too that I think terrified me the most about this film, aside from the Babadook monster, obviously, is that like neglect and emotional abuse that it portrays, but also just like the isolation. And you see how lonely she is. You know, you see her like she goes to like the mall and she is like basically kind of creepily looking at like this couple making out in the car, and it's like she's almost like jealous, like she wants that love, she needs like a connection in her life almost, and the only connection she kind of has is to this kid, you know, and she doesn't have the best relationship with her son. And I think the film just does a really fantastic job with that, you know.
And for her, it's hard to look at her son and not think of her husband, you know. He died on the day her son was born, you know.
I mean, you even see the kid repeating it like throughout the film. Like he's just repeating it to like random strangers and they're like, oh, okay, you know.
And the performance of this kid feels like a kid. It feels like you're watching a 6-year-old in the way he talks to people. Kids talk about things out of context. They'll randomly bring up something that you're just like, wait, what? That sounds dark. You know, and they have that scene where the child services come to look at the house and the kid flat out says like, we don't celebrate my birthday on the day because that's when my dad died. And it's just like, it's what kids do.
Kids and
it's
really awkward and uncomfortable.
Kids will bring up stuff. But yeah, it examines this person's life from all those aspects. Having child services show up to address what's going on. Obviously, her kid wasn't in school, you know, things like that. That sense of realness really helps this movie because you have such a grand concept. You have a monster called the Babadook who has a top hat on and long fingers, and he's dark and he wears creepy clothing, and it's really unsettling, you know? And to have that, you need a sense of authenticity to help sell you on it. Because granted, if you would read this child's book, it'd be really scary, you know, like it'd freak me out. But for some people, they might just dismiss it, you know? So I'm glad this movie took that authentic approach to show, okay, these are people and they're going to have real reactions to stuff. They're going to try to go to the cops. They're going to try to tell friends. They're, you know, things like that before they start to realize that, you know, maybe I'm starting to sound a little crazy. So as I was mentioning with like those news stories and stuff, they're really meant to recollect the details and motives behind a person's descent into madness pretty much, you know. We hear these news stories and we're kind of left to pick up the pieces of, okay, well, what actually happened behind this person killing their family, you know? The great part about this film is you get an inside perspective on what that feels like. What would it look like to focus too much on the bad things in life, not being able to process your grief, and you take it out on your family, and you take it out on your friends, and you take it out on the people around you. You get that inside perspective onto what that feels like, you know? And the most important part, the scariness of not being able to stop it. You realize you're losing sanity. How scary would it be not to be able to do anything about it? And again, the film works on that in multiple levels. You have the scariness of the book, which is, like Wallied said, a great foreshadowing. And that's what she sees it as. It shows me killing my son. It shows me killing the dog. How do I stop this from happening? And as the movie goes on, she realizes, I can't stop this. That is a very scary, scary fact and a very scary thing to see. Granted, I've never been to the point where I'm driven mad or anything like that, but there are moments in life where you lose your grip on reality. And it's scary. It's scary to think this whole world I live in is kind of something I created. What would it mean if I were to lose part of that? You know,
Yeah.
what pieces are going to be left. This movie works on so many different levels. One thing I want to get into is the design of the Babadook. You see it in this book, and they could have had a very much, standard approach to how they wanted to film it and things like that. One of the things I love is they use kind of like an old filming technique that you would see in like those 1900s black and white movies like L'Inferno or something. The Babadook has like this creepiness to him where he's like this, like when you see him, it's like this slow frame rate. He's kind of like moving all over the place in a creepy way.
Yeah.
He's not lit great. And when you see him, they actually do a great job. They put him in those old black and white movies. And that's how those films used to look. They had that graininess to them. They had that darkness.
Like that
and
stop motion kind of
stop
bit.
motion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what a creative way to show this monster that, yeah, you could have just had an actor just walk up in a creepy way. But they use not only a blend of those tricks, they use in-camera effects. They use
Like a first person POV too, near the end that I really loved a lot.
yeah, seeing all this amalgamation of stuff work together to show this monster, I just felt like was so great. And again, I don't think people give it its due, but to create something, obviously a movie, it's great and everything. It's hard, it's a challenge. Obviously, like with all the psychological horror coming out today, yeah, that is a challenge. I fully will acknowledge that. That is 100% a challenge. But then to take it a step further and to create this original monster and sell you on the world that it's in and make you believe it and make you not question what you're looking at is hard. That is a big, big challenge. And I feel like that's why you don't see it a lot in a lot of these psychological horror movies and things today. Creating those monsters and making them look unique and making them scary, that is very, very, very big challenge. And I think that's why we see a lot of humans are the greatest evil we're ever going to see. Humans are the pinnacle of what's evil out there. And I feel like maybe that's because these filmmakers and writers are kind of scared to create something original, create a monster that fills you with fear and makes you, when you turn off the lights at home, run to your bed or something,
Yeah.
because that's a hard challenge. And I really recognize this movie for that. Like the Babadook is really creepy and really original, and I'm just so shocked that this writer was able to think of this,
Yeah. It's like old timey in like the best way possible for
Yeah.
sure. He doesn't even feel like he's from like this generation. He feels like he's from like a long, long time ago in like the 1800s.
Yeah. But again, it works on that level. And then we have the psychological horror stuff going on. But then you have this very real story. So this book does this great foreshadowing of these events, and you get to watch it play out. The mom ends up killing the dog. The mom ends up, attacking her son because now the Babadook has fully made it in, that part, that grief and everything has brung itself and manifested itself in this evil way inside this mom. And now shit has hit the fan. You have this mom who has fully removed herself from the outside world and pretty much has her kid stuck in that house with her now. It works on that possession level aspect as well. We see other movies about possession and things like that. This movie has that in here too, and that stuff works really well. You get to see this mom being fully evil, screaming at her kid, threatening him.
It's very effective.
Yeah.
It's
It's like, damn, I really feel like she's going to lose it.
Yeah. It's like the grief and like everything that's gone on, all the events in the film. It's like it's just overtaken her almost.
Yeah. And it kind of, delves into those traditional horror stuff. She's obviously chasing him around with a knife. Absolutely scary. But earlier in the film, this kid, you realize that he's very smart. He watches these old magic shows and things like that. And
His gadgets that you see throughout too.
yeah, and he makes all this stuff. and you know he has to essentially fight his mom, but to him he's fighting this Babadook. He believes it's real. He read the story. He doesn't think it's fake. So in that, he's not necessarily fighting his mom. He's trying to save his mom, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a very real moment where the kid just straight up tells the mom like, I love you, you know. He's trying to fix her. He wants to help her. He knows how sad she is. You know?
He feels like he has this like responsibility to almost kind of take over since the dad is not really there to help out anymore.
Yeah. Some great moments happen in this whole ending sequence. You have the neighbor come over to check because there's a call that was made, and you see this mom be just so rude and mean to this neighbor. And the way it's shot, you just see all these shadows on her face. And you could tell that this neighbor like genuinely cares about her and her son. That's a sad part.
Yeah, that was probably one of the more sadder parts of the film for sure. Especially with like the shadows. Again, I feel like it just like shows her character, and that like this Babadook has basically 90% has possessed her, I would say, you know. That's kind of how I took it with like the shadow lighting and everything, because it was really awesome how they shot it.
Yeah. And it plays into those aspects again, like I said, of possession and everything. You see her trying to like climb and break down the door, you know, stuff you would see in like a normal like possession movie. It's very, I don't know, it just feels, the way the actress portrayed it, it just feels very genuine, you know. Her performance is like so amazing.
It's like I feel like she builds it up too also throughout the film, because like you get subtle hints of like the possession that comes, and then it's like once it like finally builds up, it feels just like almost like a fireworks, almost like when she is breaking down the door, when she does float up to like go to the kid at one point. I feel like it's just like that is just basically she's not the same person anymore. It's like it's not even the mom at this point.
Why did the dog have to die, man? That was sad.
Yeah, what does she have against? What does the Babadook have against dogs? Someone call up PETA.
And it was at that moment where I put two and two together that I was like, okay, this is the book. This is the book that they showed. Oh shit. You know, I started freaking out. I was like,
yeah, it's
kill
like
the dog. What's going to happen? You know, because in the book it shows her strangling her son, and
yeah,
I don't know.
That was really disturbing.
Really disturbing.
I love one thing I wanted to talk about that I felt like adds to the overall horror of the film is really the sound design and like the use of like the ominous ambiance throughout, you know, because like one thing I love a lot is that the director really restrained herself from like not using any really score or anything. Like you have little bits and pieces of it throughout, and sound effects too, but for the most part, it's mostly like the sound of like just of how quiet just the house is, or just even like household objects, and you hear just kind of like the loud sounds those bring, you know, they bring kind of a almost terror to it, almost, that I noticed, and especially near the end with like just the sound of like the Babadook and everything gave it just a more disturbing tone to the overall film in general.
And having the I guess kind of perspective, or however they wanted to do it, I don't know, but making the Babadook obviously has that blend of old, you know, 1900s type movie look, but the sound design kind of lends to something that is maybe kind of almost like an insect. The sound it makes has like this rattling, like
when it crawls up like the roof, or like not the roof, but the ceiling. Yeah, exactly.
And it ties into when she finds them in her kitchen and everything. You really get the feeling like what is this, you know? And I love that. I love that amalgamation of all that stuff. And then obviously when it starts speaking, if I were to hear that at night in my bed, oh man,
I wouldn't sleep for a year.
Or even before he shows up, like right when he shows up, she's asleep, you hear the 3 knocks on the door. I was like, oh my God, nope, this is too much.
Or even just like the sound of her calling, like getting the phone call from the Babadook. My goodness.
I love those moments in horror, like the build up to the monster showing up. man, that can be so scary and it can really freak you out.
Yeah.
But again, I think it delivers past that when the monster is revealed and everything. It still really works, you know, because sometimes
Yeah.
buildups can be really good in horror, but then when the time comes, you're just kind of like, yeah, it kind of turned into like this generic kind of thing.
Yeah, I was a little worried with that happening, especially when I saw the top hat. I was like, "Oh no, they're not gonna reveal the monster, are they?"
Yeah.
But I'm very happy that they didn't. But you still get to like see its like fingers, and I do really love that first POV that we
Yeah.
get of the monster, just to kind of see it's like from the perspective of the monster. I thought that was like really awesome, and I was
Yeah.
really surprised by that.
So towards the end, she has this final confrontation with this monster, and you know, great performance. She's yelling at it like, "You're trespassing in my." I swear, her delivery in that line is just so great.
So powerful.
You really feel
Yeah.
like she's at that breaking point of, I want you out of here. I'm done. I'm done letting you control my life. I'm taking my life back in my own hands. And again, it works on that level of a monster movie, but the deeper level is she's done letting this grief rule her life, you know, and her decisions and everything.
Yeah.
Such a smart way to show that and portray that, you know.
And especially too, there's a line earlier on in the film where her sister is telling her that like she's been grieving for like 6 or 7 years, and it's
Yeah.
like, ooh man, she really like this really deeply affected her.
Yeah. And the Babadook really starts to play into some of those aspects. Obviously, the Babadook starts to play into that whole bartering aspect where you start to maybe think like, what can I give up to make this situation work, you know?
Yeah.
And it's so creepy. The Babadook is there, and then it changes into like the dad, and the dad is just like, just bring me the boy. I swear that freaked me out. I was like, oh, what the heck?
It's like her test almost to see
Yeah.
if she would actually do it. And oh my goodness.
And this movie goes through those 7 stages, you know, and
Yeah.
it shows the angry, the sadness,
The denial, and then of course the acceptance.
yeah.
I guess kind of the acceptance, but we can get into that
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
end. Yeah.
But I swear, the final confrontation, I just love. You see this thing like stretch out, it's in the shadows. You see it has like this giant arms and everything, and such an amazing like practical effects that were going on. I swear, for me, it really worked. And don't get that full reveal, like you said. It's
The closest we kind of get is when like the Babadook is basically screaming at her, and we get this like really awesome like white lighting
Yeah.
on her face. That was just genuinely terrifying.
yeah.
And that scream too is, ooh man, one of the scariest screams I've heard in a long time.
She takes the moment and she says, "You're done. I've had enough of this. I'm done with this." And she has to finally accept what had happened to her husband and everything. And the moment she does that, the Babadook flees, and you see this POV of it going all the way to the basement and everything. Great shot. That was something I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
And does a little bit of a jump, you know?
Yeah.
Now, I feel like this whole next part really, I don't know, it ties up the movie in such a great way. It wasn't really, first time viewing it, wasn't hitting me that this is what the director was doing. But this whole ending part really helped me to understand the story I was being told. It sets up that it's months later, they're celebrating. She, obviously, you can tell she's back to normal. You can tell that she's fully, you know, past that dark moment in her life. See the sun, you see the neighbor, they're celebrating birthday and everything. And it's great. And it's just like, awesome. It's great, you know? And now that I'm thinking about it, the movie could have ended there and it would have been great. Everything would have been, you know, fine. But it doesn't. It touches on that part of grief and depression that I think is very understated and not mentioned as much. They collect these worms, and she takes it down into the basement. And in my mind, I was like, what's happening? You know, wait, what's going on? And the son is like, well, can I go down there? Can I see it? And she's like, no, not until you're older. And then she takes those worms down into the basement, places them on the ground. I'm like, what's going on? And then the POV of the Babadook racing up to her, and she has to calm it and tell it everything's okay, this and this. And I was just like, wait, what? And while it plays out, I started to realize what this whole movie was doing this whole time. For some people, they probably catch on to it quicker, which I'm sure Wallied did. I'm just not that smart. The Babadook is grief. The Babadook this whole time, for me, I wasn't fully making those connections. The Babadook is grief, and that can affect a person in a very dark and negative way, a very scary way. Sometimes it can change us into the most angry, distraught people, you know? And how do you solve that? How do you move past that? And her having it be in the house really shows that you never fully get past that. You can never fully be rid of your grief and your loss of someone. You have to acknowledge it. You have to give it a space, you know, to where, okay, today am I going to think about this? Am I going to think about it? Am I going to give it the time of day? Yeah, I will. I'll acknowledge it. I'll process that it's there. But I'm not going to let it control my life, and I'm not going to let it affect me. Such a smart message. And again, the movie didn't need to show that. It could have ended, I felt like, after the whole happy ending. But showing this was a very real side that really just surprised me. You know, sometimes we don't process our grief fully. We don't fully get beyond it. You know, there are always going to be remnants of it there. Anytime you're reminded of the person you lost or the you know, thing or whatever, it's hard to acknowledge that. But we need to learn to do that in a healthy way. You know, just to fully say you're past something, it really is that idealistic type behavior. You know, it's always going to be there. You just have to make sure you're doing it in the right way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that. I love that ending. Really just surprised me, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, yeah, I kind of saw it as like her basically not destroying like the Babadook as like an interpersonal demon, but it's almost like her not bottling it up anymore and taking care of it and giving it almost space, you know, and giving it, I guess, feeding it, almost kind of treating it as like a pet almost, rather than trying to see it as like a detriment in your life. I was really, really surprised by that. Honestly, I wasn't expecting that's how it was going to end, but I thought it was really tastefully done. And again, it shows mental illness and like grief and just like interpersonal demons in such a respectful way, while also being really horrifying. And you see the consequences of how, if you don't take action with these things and you're just kind of putting them off and bottling them up, this is like the worst outcome of what could happen.
I love this movie. I love the direction, the writing, the acting. I know people harp on the kid's performance a little bit, but this is such a big challenge.
He
for
was
a kid
such
actor.
a great actor.
He
I
was
thought
great.
he, you know, again, because he does have like a lot of developmental issues, like you were mentioning,
Yeah.
and you see that like the grief kind of hit him hard at like especially a really young age too, and you kind of see how he's kind of processing that also, you know. It was just really sad.
Yeah.
I was just really surprised by that, honestly.
And I don't know, people are like, oh, he's screaming, all this gets annoying. I'm like,
but that's how a kid
that's
would
how
react.
a kid
though.
acts. A kid screams.
Like, what do you want?
Like, I really, I don't know. I'm always dumbfounded when I hear that. There's so much more to this movie beyond that.
Yeah.
And again, I think Essie Davis gives an amazing performance. She feels real. She feels like a real person. At no point when I was watching this is like, that's an actor. That was great. You know, she felt like a real person.
Yeah, it didn't feel like over the top, surprisingly.
Yeah. And I love, again, we mentioned the look of this movie, using those dark colors. That color palette really helps you feel that depressive state, you know?
Yeah, it puts you in that atmosphere for sure. And one thing too I also really love is the film is like 90 minutes, but it goes by so quickly. Like just the pace of the film, it's like mostly all killer, no filler. Like it really doesn't waste any time, like just getting to like the meat of the film, which I really love that about the film a lot.
Yeah. And the sound design of the Babadook, the overall look of him is just something that I love. It's so creative and so you could tell that there was a lot of care put into it, you know. Even something as simple as like the book they're reading, you can tell that like they put thought into how they wanted this book to look. You know?
Yeah.
And it's only like a minute of the movie.
Yeah, and it adds to just the overall terror of the film. That's why I
Yeah.
think it works so well.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. This is, I really feel like once this movie happened, it opened the gateway for people to tell stories like this in a horror format, you know? Because
Yeah.
before that, we'd have our remakes, we'd have our reboots of trying to bring horror icons to the modern era when it's like, maybe we can create something that, you know, is different. It's its own thing, you know?
Yeah, and it's a lot more grounded too compared to a lot of those other types of horror films or those more classic horror films and everything. You know, it's definitely more grounded and it's not as like extraterrestrial as like a say like a Jason or like or an alien, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I don't know. I feel like that groundness really like it helps you feel the authenticity of everything, you know? But I think while riding that middle line, it really does both very, very well. You know, I could show this to someone who likes those horror movies and I feel like they would enjoy it, you know, because it has those scares, it has the build up, it has that creative monster that then just hearing the name, you're like, what is that? You know?
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery and intrigue to it.
Yeah, it has that whole side. And then it also has this emotional, deeper story that's going on. And I feel like it can appeal to both people very well if you were showing someone who likes more dramas, things like that. But then if you're showing like a horror fan, I feel like they would get something out of this too, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is a big, big challenge to try to blend those together and make it work, you know? Because sometimes, I'll be honest, with some newer psychological horror stuff, sometimes I'll be like, yeah, I found it interesting and everything, but it wasn't that scary, you know? I was like, yeah, it didn't really scare me in any way. It was just kind of, it was okay. This movie works on both those levels very well. I'm trying to think. Oh, there was something I wanted to mention before I get into score. Just to show the level of detail that they did while making this movie, they made that whole book, that propped. It goes past what you're watching in the movie. At one point, she stops. I believe they were going to show the rest of it, but they ended up cutting it because it does kind of spoil the whole ending.
Oh, got you.
But they made 6,000 of these books to purchase, and now they're worth like thousands of dollars.
Oh my
it's like
God.
an actual pop-up book.
Oh, nice.
But in it, people have uploaded it, what goes into the ending. So past the point where it shows her strangling the kid, it says this whole stuff. It says, there's just no way you're off the hook if you're all grown up when you read this book and you snub your nose with a civilized look, you'll appeal even more to the big Babadook. And it's like, whoa. And it alludes to the fact that like when you're grown up and stuff, that's when this stuff starts to happen, you know? And I believe they alluded to it with the kid. She tells him, when you're older, you know, you'll see it, you know? But man, that was that I was like, oh my God, that was in that book.
Yeah. Wow.
But
Jeez.
then past that, it has on the last page, it recontextualizes what it said. It says, I only said might. And then that's when the book ends. Really great. Again, the amount of detail that goes into it is just amazing. This is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. And again, coming into the 2010s and stuff, I just felt like that would never happen, you know, because I always looked upon the 80s horror movies, 60s stuff as just like the pinnacle, you know, and that 2010s era. There's enjoyment to be found. I'm not trying to dismiss those movies at all, but you know, it just kind of felt like they were just trying to only show violence and graphic and stuff.
Yeah, just trying to be a little bit more edgy.
Yeah. And I was just like, yeah, it's great. And there are some movies which I love from that era, but this one I put up there with those classics that I've seen. I put it up there with The Thing. Obviously, it's one of my favorites. I put it up there with Kerneko. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't seen that.
Oh,
What's
okay.
that?
Oh, I might have to mention that one. I put it up there with Kerneko. I put it up there with Eyes
Okay.
Without a Face. There's so many horror movies which I love. Yeah, to me, this is the best of the modern horror movies that I've seen. I feel like this kind of paved the way for all, again, the psychological horror we see today. And it just does it in such a great way. And yeah, again, to me, making monsters and stuff like that is such a challenge. It is so hard to make something like that work because it's something that doesn't exist. You can tell real stories, and yeah, in telling those real stories, you have that crutch of it being real. You know, you don't need to sell anyone on anything. To create an original monster and make you feel like it's real is such a big challenge. It is such a huge undertaking to want to do something like that. And to pull it off in this way, to me, is just why I love movies. To be creative like that, I just love it so, so much. So yeah, I'm going to give this movie a 10 out of 10. I love this movie so, so much. Yeah.
Yeah, this really surprised me a lot. I really loved the drama of the film. I loved how just disturbing it got with its. Again, I did mention this kind of last episode about how like family stuff does terrify me, and this was, yeah, this really did it for me, and I just loved just the acting in the film. I really loved like just the horror of it all, and just like the metaphors used throughout. And also, I just loved the pace of the film. It doesn't overstay its welcome in any way. I would say my only little minor complaint would be just some of the music choices being a little hit or miss, because I did love some of them like early on, but I felt like it would just kind of build up and then it was just like, it would just kind of fizzle out. But that would be like my only little complaint. I did love the music though from the scene where it was like her like watching the TV. I really loved that. But yeah, very disturbing. Easily one of my favorite horror films I've seen in probably a long time. It's one I've been nonstop thinking about all week since I saw it. I'm gonna go with a 9.5. Yeah, 9.5 out of 10. I feel like the more I've thought about this film, like the better it's just aging in my mind. And I will definitely watch this film again because I feel like I feel like this is a film that I feel like will get even better and better on rewatch.
I really can't recommend it enough. I know people have heard of it. There are memes, obviously, that have gone around with this movie. The Babadook is actually a gay icon, if you didn't know that, Wallied.
Oh, really?
There's a little meme. I'll mention it.
Okay.
On Netflix, this movie was accidentally listed under the LGBTQ category.
Oh, got you.
It was just randomly put there, and people were like, wait, what? Why is that here? And everyone said, it's because the Babadook's a gay icon. And there's a bunch of memes about it. I thought it was really funny.
Yeah, that's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, you guys have seen memes about it. Obviously, the one that's popular is the kid screaming in the car. The mom's like, why can't you just be normal? And he just screams.
Oh, smacks. Okay. Yeah. Damn, okay.
But please, I encourage you to give it a watch. Again, I feel like this movie works on multiple levels. You have traditional horror. You have that blend of new psychological horror. You have a blend of possession, those types of storylines. You have just a very real story about loss. This movie blends all of those together in such a great way. So yeah, that is just a true testament to the talent behind this movie. Obviously, I'll mention it again. Jennifer Kent, who directed and wrote this movie. Amazing job. I believe she directed one other movie past this that I want to check out. It's not a horror movie, but it has darker elements and stuff.
Yeah, The Nightingale.
Yeah,
that's on my watch list.
One day I'm gonna check that one out. But man, did she make a great movie? I feel like Essie Davis deserved a Best Actress nomination that year because that was amazing. Yeah, and I definitely would have given Jennifer Kent Best Directing nominations because she did such a great job. But yeah, I feel like this movie really laid the groundwork to where we are today. I don't think, obviously, it's not the first psychological horror movie ever made. What's the one everyone talks about? I need to see it. Rosemary's Baby.
Oh, okay, Polanski.
Yeah, I think everyone would say that was probably one of the first psychological horror movies ever made. And then obviously movies like The Shining and everything came out. But in updating it for a modern audience and bringing it to the forefront, this movie had its hands in doing that. And I just want to recognize that with all the movies we see today, especially with, A24 horror, this movie kind of helped pave the way for that, And I just want to give it its due, because 10 years later, here we are. It still holds up. And I think anyone can watch this movie and at least get something out of it. Yeah. What was the question that we had?
I guess just more of like the state of psychological horror and just where we're going with it. This film is 10 years old, and this film did pioneer a lot. It did pioneer like a lot of the horror we see today, like The Witch, Hereditary, a lot of the popular A24 horror stuff. And yeah, I guess just how do we feel on the state of it? What are your thoughts?
Okay, so focusing on this movie's greatest strengths, I feel like points out my greatest flaws with A24. I feel like using people and real life kind of stuff is kind of a crutch almost when it comes to horror. To me, the real challenge is creating something original and selling you on the fact that you're going to believe it's real. That's a big challenge. And granted, if the Babadook wasn't even a presence in this movie, yeah, you would have a great story about, possession and loss and everything. But the fact that the Babadook's presence in there really elevates it and really shows you that you can convey these grand ideas and larger than life concepts in a creative way. Maybe that ties to something like me when I was a kid. Obviously, being taught morals and things through these movies was something that I always very much enjoyed. Some of my favorite movies have those same aspects of using characters to convey these big messages that you need to hear. Obviously, growing up seeing Spider-Man, I love Spider-Man for what it was and what it did and everything. But now rewatching it as an adult, and you get to know the impact behind the line of, with great power comes great responsibility. That is a big thing to show to a kid, So I guess maybe it ties to that aspect of teaching you these lessons and stuff in this creative way. And I just feel like maybe a lot of these modern psychological horror stuff doesn't really do that to the full extent. It doesn't really leave me feeling any different than when I walked in.
Okay.
And maybe that's something we can challenge ourselves to try to do more. Like, I love Hereditary. It's great. And leaving Hereditary was a great experience, but it wasn't like watching this movie and now realizing, oh, there's this whole other context to this thing that I call grief and depression, that I wasn't considering.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know, maybe I would like modern psychological horror to kind of try those challenges to convey these bigger messages through the context of just, a scary horror movie. I think it's very effective, and this movie shows that it can work, But yeah, what's your opinion on the modern state of everything?
So I would say for me, I'm not too familiar with a lot of psychological horror. That's kind of more out of my field, but I would say from like a few of the things I've watched, some have been really good, and then some have been just kind of more okay, where I'm like, it just didn't really connect with me just because like they have some of the cliches and tropes of other horror films. But I would say like a few that like have worked for me would be one that I wouldn't really say is more horror, but more just like a disturbing drama, is like The Killing of a Sacred Deer, where the film uses like Greek mythology. It's based off of like an Agamemnon story, I believe. And they use like a life for a life as a way to show like a sacrifice of like how far would you go to sacrifice your family from basically dying like a slow death almost. Like that really got to me like a lot, you know? And that's one that I feel like uses that psychological sense of like this guy basically killed one of his family members while doing like a surgery, you know? And this was like accidental. And you see that grief that almost like touches the son almost, and he wants this like blind revenge for his father, you know. I think that's like a creative, effective, like psychological horror film I've kind of seen more recently, like just in the past few years. But I would just say like overall, I notice it's very saturated. I noticed there's a lot of psychological horror stuff out there, and I haven't really seen too much of it. It just doesn't really look that appealing to me. It looks kind of more like just kind of like your standard horror thing that you've probably seen a million times, but it's not something I would say I'm like too like in the wheelhouse of, I guess I would say.
I feel like you said, when it's oversaturated, it kind of does just start to like blend together, you know? And it's like I said, it's like, how many times are we going to show that people are evil and humanity sucks, you know? Like,
Yeah.
it gets repetitive, and it's like, yeah, it works, but I mean, come on, let's push ourselves. What other things can we tell?
What other topics like could we go into? And I
Yeah.
feel like, I don't know, I think that's the reason I love Killing of a Sacred Deer so much, because it's like it takes like a story from Greek mythology and it puts like a more of like a psychological horror spin on it and a more absurd surrealist direction towards it, where it makes it even more disturbing than it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Granted, I don't know. We'll talk about A24 horror here pretty soon. That's a topic I just want to get fully into. I don't know. People tell me they've some of the scariest movies ever. Like, I'll watch them and I'm like, there is literally nothing that scared me in that movie, you know? So yeah, that's something I want to get into as well. But obviously, I think that all pertains around what people find scary. You know, some people that is scary, you know?
Yeah.
But a lot of the times I go through these psychological horror movies that just feel overly long and don't justify their stay. You know, by the end, I'm just like, come on, you know, you were building towards something and it didn't really feel like it was worth it, you know?
Yeah, I would say like an example of that was like the more recent one from like a while back, Doctor Sleep, Mike Flanagan's like Shining kind of sequel, or it was like it was well made like on a technical level, but it just felt like kind of like a more nostalgia baity kind of thing on like The Shining almost, with these people. Just like the villain, I just really didn't care for all that much, where it was like she's just sucking the breaths out of people. I don't know if you ever saw it, but yeah, it's really silly. And then like Ewan McGregor is great in it. Like, he's fantastic, but I just really wasn't connecting with a lot of like just the horror of it all. Like, it was just kind of silly, and it took itself like just way too seriously.
Yeah.
For just like what it was almost, you know?
And I feel like we have those two realms right now where it's like you have obviously the freaking Conjuring universe going on, and then you have psychological horror. And it's like, I don't really like either of those things. So I'm kind of left in like a middle area of like
limbo. Yeah.
Hopefully something comes along that interests me. I guess a more recent one that I liked was Long Legs, but I didn't really find it that scary at all.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah. So I'm kind of waiting for something similar to this movie, The Babadook, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, and then you have your whole weird Grindhouse Terrifier series going on right now.
Exploitative horror type of thing.
Oh, that's just gore porn and just graphic kills, and I don't really care about that stuff, so I don't know. I'm very particular with what I like.
Yeah, same.
So
as long as it's not like the Smile film from a couple years ago,
oh yeah,
I think we'll be okay.
And then we have that whole area of like people trying to create original monsters, and it just doesn't work. Like like Smile, and then
that was horrendous.
The freaking Bye Bye Man. Like your guy doesn't even look scary. He's just wearing a hoodie and he walks around with this hellhound, and it's like, what's scary about him? You know. So I guess there are those people who try to make these original monsters, but it just doesn't work, you know?
Yeah, it falls flat on its face. And again, it just takes itself way too seriously, especially a film like Smile, where it's like, this should be like a horror comedy. Like, this would be like a perfect horror comedy. And again, like the smiling thing could work, but ooh, man, characters are not very good. And it has like every horror cliche you could think of in the dictionary. I'm sorry. I don't really like that movie. It's really bad. But
Over the past 10 years, there's maybe a handful that I like. So it's unfortunate, you know?
Yeah.
Granted, some of these movies can grow and grow on you and stuff. So I don't want to say anything completely conclusive right now.
Who knows? They'll gain cult followings in like 10 years.
Yeah. I will say just every time I've tried to give psychological horror a chance, it just has not paid off for me.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know. I recommend this movie. Check it out.
Babadook.
Babadook.
Dook. All right.
What do we got next?
All right. So I guess this is kind of psychological, though I would say it's more of like a crime thriller. But it's a film that does kind of terrify me. The one word I would describe it as is hypnotic. And it's a film I've wanted to talk about for a long time, and I've been saving it just for this Halloween Extravaganza. So the film I'm going to go with is a film called Cure, or Kua, by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. He's not related to Akira Kurosawa, surprisingly. But yeah, it's called Cure. It's from 1997. Has Koji Yakusho in it. One of my favorite actors. He's fantastic in the film. And yeah, I don't want to say too much about it because it is one of those films that the horror of it is very surprising. And the just different directions and routes that it takes is like, it just puts you in a roller coaster. And I know this is Bong Joon-ho's favorite film. I believe it's his favorite film ever made. And yeah, this is one of my favorite films. It's one of my favorite horror films that I've seen. And it's one that I want to shine light on. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. So if you guys don't want to be spoiled for Cure by Kiyoshi Kurosawa, it's from 1997. Make sure you guys watch it before the next episode comes out.
Awesome. Thank you guys for joining us. We are going to close out episode 15. We're going to have more bonus episodes coming out. So if you see them get uploaded, I encourage you to check them out. Yeah, we're getting closer to Halloween and the scariness that's behind it. My list is changing every day. Some days I want to maybe recommend a movie, and then I'm like, maybe I want to do this movie. So this is really hard. Pause. But, you know, we're going to get through it. So I just encourage you guys to check out these movies. Hopefully, if you're in that mood to be scared, these movies will work for you. That's what I want. And I hope you get that feeling of eeriness and this is weird, you know, because this is one of my favorite seasons. And I love it. So thank you guys for listening for us. I encourage you guys, if you have a different opinion, let us know in the comments. If what I said is wrong or it sounds dumb, let me know in the comments. I want to hear people's point of views. You know, maybe you love a movie that we didn't like or vice versa. Let us know. I want to, maybe create a discussion. Hopefully you guys share it with your friends. And I guess that's really it.
Yeah, thank y'all for listening. Just subscribe and like the videos, like the podcasts on Spotify. And then, we also have a letterbox too. If you want to see the films, the recommendations that we talk about and you're curious about them at all, you can check those out on the letterbox. We also have an Instagram too. Babadook, Dook. Surprised me a lot.
Awesome.
Cool. Go ahead.
We'll see you guys on the next episode of our Halloween horror scary movie all-inclusive extravaganza. It's just going to be the biggest name I can think of. But thank you guys and join us on the next one.
Halloween Extravaganza for short. Good day and good night, mates.